I'm not in the business of creating safe spaces necessarily, but I think we've lost our ability as a society to just sit down, have a conversation, exchange ideas, and maybe even learn something. In 1994, 16% of fathers were being awarded custody. Today, that percentage is roughly 20%, according to modern family law statistics. So we're seeing some notable improvement, but it's still not even close, right? 80-20, it's not even close. There's a big disparity there. Women literally have every financial incentive to not be with the fathers of their children. But because social media and society has told women that men ain't worth nothing, and they should make sure that their men know they're worthless. It's crucial that there is a genuine, good man in the life of a child. In this episode of the Man Mode Podcast, we explore complex and uncomfortable truths about why so many fathers are absent from their children's lives today. From the cultural aftershocks of the sexual revolution to the harsh realities of the family court system and the impact of modern feminism. Now, I break down some of what I find to be the real reasons fatherhood is in crisis or has been in crisis. Now, it's important for y'all to understand that this isn't necessarily about blame, it's about understanding, about having honest conversations that most people are afraid to start. I share personal opinions, real life examples, and cultural critiques. And I personally challenge you to think deeper about what's really behind the continued rise in fatherless homes. So before we get to it, I want to make sure that everyone listening to this understands that my opinions on these sensitive topics are just that, my opinions. Yes, they're informed and researched opinions. However, I highly encourage that each and every person does their own research into the issues discussed on this podcast, not just this episode, but for future episodes as well. It's really important that you do your own research on this. Don't just take my word for it, okay? So I do my own independent research, yeah, but it's very important to note for anybody who's listening that I'm not a college-educated professional or a certified expert. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a therapist. I'm just a regular, everyday guy looking to start conversations with other regular guys and regular people in general. I think all of us can have a unique and worthwhile perspective on these. I can offer my own unique perspectives into just about any topic of conversation, provided we're not talking about, political matters. I'm not a person who bases my thoughts and opinions on any political platform or party. I just enjoy, diving into the whys and the hows of the issues that men face on a daily basis. So, that being said, if you or someone you know needs professional help and or advice, please contact your primary healthcare provider, health professional, or certified expert. So, with that disclaimer out of the way, let's go ahead and let's dive into it. The sexual revolution. So, the sexual revolution of the 60s and 70s marked a massive shift in attitude towards sexuality and relationships as a whole. Some experts have even considered it to be a significant factor that led to the increase of the large number of divorces that, we see in America even today. This isn't really news at this point. It's, just a Google search away from you possibly coming to the same conclusion. So why did this revolution cause this? In my opinion, right? So because of this societal shift of opinion, procreation and childbearing were typically locked behind marriage, right? Now, I'm not saying that people, weren't having physical intimacy, sex, out of wedlock per se, but it wasn't really socially acceptable like it is today before the sexual revolution. And in many areas across America, it's still frowned upon. However, even in those areas, it's still more socially acceptable than before the end of this quote unquote revolution. It ended in the 70s, by the way. And it's really hard to say that it was a revolution, so to speak. But anyways, it just a massive societal shift in opinion. So, but I think this caused women to, leave their marriages and relationships, healthy or not, at a rate that we just weren't usually seeing before. Fast forward to today, now people walk away from a marriage or a relationship the moment that they become, bored with little to no regard for their partners, spouses. Now, this isn't the sole cause of fatherless households in America, but it's important to note that this societal shift in opinion has possibly played a significant role in fostering a single parent environment where mothers typically do obtain majority custody of their children. Even today, 80% of custodial parents are mothers. Again, this wasn't the sole purpose or even really the main focus of this shift of opinion, nationwide, but the consequences of it are undeniable. There was some backlash from it, right? There was some repercussions of this. I feel like sexual intimacy used to come with a level of commitment to that other person that you were with. But that doesn't really seem to be the, case today or the popular thing today. So because of this lack of emotional connection with physical intimacy, I believe it can lead to a reduced emotional connection between a father and his kids. It would actually be very interesting to have a guest on this podcast that, lived through this time and experienced this firsthand, right? Like in real time. I think it's real easy to formulate your own opinion on something that happened, 50 to 60 years ago at this point, because we have the benefit of looking back on these things after they've, been studied for decades, right? And it's still a topic of debate. I'll see what I can do about getting a guest on here that would know more, because it would be fascinating to get that perspective, right? So moving on. Now, the next topic on the issue of fatherless households in our country is debatably the number one reason for dads not being in their kids' lives. That being the court/legal system. So the court system, as I mentioned, right? About 80% of custodial single parents are mothers. Now, trends have shown that more fathers are being awarded custody of their kids. In 1994, 16% of fathers were being awarded custody. Today, that percentage is roughly 20%, according to modern family law statistics. So we're seeing some notable improvement, but it's still not even close, right? 80-20, it's not even close. There's a big disparity there. Take my state, for example, North Carolina. I don't see very many fathers being awarded custody, even when they're the better parent, and whenever they're less toxic, more reliable, and can possibly provide a better quality of life for their children. It seems like, short of murder or being hooked on hardcore drugs, mothers are still heavily favored, heavily so. It kind of seems like women get all of the legal benefits of raising their kids by themselves, while fathers are forced to sacrifice a significant portion of their income just for child support, which I can't even imagine the toll that can take on the mental health of a good dad. North Carolina even enforces the non-custodial parent to pay child support, even if you can prove that you're providing everything a child needs. And this isn't the only state, right? I mean, there's several states that are like this, but that don't seem right to me. Good fathers should be rewarded, not forced to fork over thousands of dollars on top of what they already provide. Not only that, there's no guarantee that the money you're being forced to pay is actually going towards your kids. Women literally have every financial incentive to not be with the fathers of their children. And, to me, really, my opinion, right? That's not so, that doesn't really seem like it's so much the women causing this, but more of a problem with our legal system that heavily incentivizes women to be a certain way towards fathers. I personally know several great fathers that don't get to see their kids nearly enough because of ridiculous court rulings that heavily favored the mother, even though the mothers weren't always the best thing for the kids. So, judges in courts across America claim to make their decisions that are best for the children, that provide the best outcomes for the children. But how can that be true when children seem to automatically go to the mother regardless of the kind of man the father is? Sure, this does protect children from dads who don't deserve to be in their kids' lives and, don't provide and are just not good people. But I personally believe that most dads are good people who work their butts off to provide a daggum good life for their kids. That's been my experience anyways. And while one can make a valid argument that things are better than they used to be, I don't think we're even close to making things genuinely easier for dads. I'm talking about the great dads that deserve their children. I aim to interview guests that can provide more clarity on this particular touchy subject because it's always baffled me that men seem to just be destined to lose custody battles. Of course, it doesn't always happen, but the statistics say that mothers get their kids more often than not. It's just how it is. So, but I want to provide genuine facts to the listeners of Man Mode. And I want to become more educated on these matters, and I'm sure y'all do too. To quote my grandfather, Poppy, if you're listening to this, yes, I did steal this from you. It's been stuck in my head, right? So to quote my grandfather, aka Poppy, to have these discussions rooted in truth instead of dogma. I think that's profound. I do. Hopefully we can get him on the show and we can get some seriously good insights from him. He's a top-notch conversationalist and he's very, very smart. Very smart. So on that note, I'd like to take a moment to let y'all know that I'm always on the lookout for potential guests to interview. It can be anybody with a good story and worthwhile insights into various topics associated with men's mental health, fatherhood, and even manhood itself. The whole point of this show is to get the stories and opinions of everyday people, to make those silent struggles be heard, acknowledged, and respected. I'm not in the business of creating safe spaces necessarily, but I think we've lost our ability as a society to just sit down, have a conversation, exchange ideas, and maybe even learn something. Right? It's all about learning stuff. You never stop learning. So if you have a guest suggestion or you'd like to be a guest yourself, then please get in touch with me by joining the Man Mode Podcast official Discord server. It's the best way to contact me personally. I'm always on Discord. I'm always keeping tabs on Discord. But it's also how this community interacts with each other every single day. Link to the Discord is on the YouTube channel homepage. Now, let's get back to it. So, moving on from the court system, right? We're going to go into modern feminism. So this segment is going to be particularly controversial because it's been at the forefront of the whole women versus men social war. And that is, of course, modern feminism. And no, I'm not bashing women at all here. Just listen for a minute, okay? Just listen to me. So, Chris Williamson, well known host of Modern Wisdom, which is a fantastic podcast, by the way. I highly suggest everybody goes and listens to Modern Wisdom. So, he interviewed one of my favorite people on YouTube, Dwayne Knoll. Dwayne brought up modern feminism in that interview, and he said something that I had never really thought about before. He asked, and I quote, "Why in the Sam Hill is something as special and wonderful as a woman want to be equal with a man? Why do you want to bring yourself down to that level?" And he also said that he believes it's degrading to women to try to be the same as a man. And his argument for this way of thinking is that women should be made to feel special and loved, not treated like a man, not treated like a man at all. So when a man courts a woman with the intent of marrying her, right, I don't feel like we necessarily want an equal, so to speak. And no, that doesn't mean someone who, can't vote or make decisions for themselves or be forced to rely on a man for happiness or be subjected to abuse and have to suffer through an unhealthy relationship. That's not what I'm saying at all. Women are not beneath men, right? That's not where people are. That's not where I'm coming from, and that's not where Dwayne's coming from, right? So that's not what he means. He mentioned that when a good man gives up his seat to a woman, like on the train or bus station or, just anywhere, he's giving up his seat because women are special. And they should be treated as such. They should be treated with respect and dignity. They should be treated special because that's what they are. So, but why am I bringing this up? Because we live in a country where men are being actively attacked just for being men, for being chivalrous, for being kind, for being respectful, at least in a traditional sense of those words. There's even been protests in the past few years. It's not a secret, right? It's not. But in the past few years, there's been protests where people were literally calling for the death of men. And men and women both were seeing this, right? That they were out there protesting this, or they were out there, spewing this just violence. Make that make sense, right? Make that make sense to me. And what's worse is anytime you make a statement that is against the ideals and opinions of those who have modern feminist beliefs, you're labeled as misogynistic and bigoted. I've even heard of husbands having to deal with wives that follow this crazy way of thinking, right? A woman will even force a man out of house and home for disagreeing with with that modern feminist mindset. Not because they're weak or threatened from a, quote unquote strong woman, but because social media and society has told women that men ain't worth nothing. And they should make sure that their men know they're worthless. Because society appears to actively try to remove even the idea of a man from the everyday household. It's like I've said before, it really does feel like to me that American culture is now designed to actively keep men suppressed and under everyone's shoe. Like a lot of men won't even consider dating anymore because of modern feminism. At least, the men that I've talked to. And it's sad that this is kind of where we're at in society. And I think it comes from a, fundamental misunderstanding between men and women as a whole, right? So I'm going to share my honest and genuine opinion. And I think that the lack of genuine men, good men, teaching teenage boys how to be a man is while we're in a mental health crisis among men, because each and every boy has to cross that threshold of manhood alone, and they're not ready to meet that challenge. We live in a time where these young boys suffer from a lack of fathers and or a positive male role model. And it's almost like American men don't take this seriously. Nick Freitas even said something in his video about raising boys that has kind of been permanently burned into my brain. And that is, us dads, we're ultimately training our replacement. That means we're training our replacement in society. And I'm sure you've heard someone in some podcast or even just normal conversation say something along the lines of, weak men create tough times. Well, you tell me. Are we in peaceful times? Or are we in tough times? Newsflash, we are in tough times. And when we have weak men, and those weak men have children, we see these negative outcomes. Now, these weak men will typically be abusive in all aspects, emotionally absent, angry, selfish, manipulative. These are the men, right, that typically abandon their families. You won't see a weak man being a loving husband, treating his wife with respect. You'll see him hitting her, or being unfaithful, cheating on her, or being possessive and paranoid. And, like there's something broken inside of these kind of guys. There's something wrong with them. You don't see them helping mothers raise kids. You don't see them helping their wives raise the kids. They won't change diapers. They won't read bedtime stories. They won't cook and help clean after supper. And when these kind of guys have kids, they're never up for the challenge. The challenge of training their replacement, should they have a son. Now, if these men, right, if these kind of men have a daughter, then they won't show her what kind of man she needs to build a life with. When good fathers or male role models aren't in a kid's life, then more often than not, you see devastatingly negative outcomes for those kids. It's crucial that there is a genuine good man in the life of a child. It's crucial. If a man isn't present to teach boys how to be men, then when it comes time for those boys to cross that threshold into manhood, like I said before, they won't be ready and they'll fail. And if a man isn't present to show a little girl what a man looks like, a good man, then she'll more often than not have a rough life with a revolving door of abusive men taking advantage of her. Here's an example of, what I'm talking about. Here's an example of what I'm talking about. My mom's dad. Now, I didn't know the man, but I've heard some awful stories about this dude. Mom grew up with 6 siblings, and her dad was very physically abusive to their mama. My granny was very physically abusive to her. I'm not sure if he would, beat and hit the boys in the house or not. I'm not sure about that. But even got into like this guy even got into all kinds of trouble in the holler that my mom grew up in McDowell County, West Virginia. So I wouldn't even be surprised if a rumor comes up about this dude killing people. Now, mom and her younger sister were spared from it, but their older sister was even sexually abused by this man. and it caused irreparable damage to mom's older sister. And she ended up committing suicide in her early 50s. You know, to this day, mom, like my mom, right, is the only one out of all the siblings that haven't been, you know, addicted to some sort of substance or, you know, has never been in trouble with the law. To my knowledge, my mom is the only one. Now, does this mean that he's the sole cause of the family turmoil? No, maybe not, right? I mean, it's debatable. But he wasn't what I would classify as a good man, you know, to say the least. He was a monster. He was a monster disguised as a human male. He didn't teach his sons how to be good men. And he didn't show his daughters what a good man looks like. You know, the boys grew up to be substance abusers and criminals to, you know, some extent, right? And all three of his daughters were divorced or had experienced an abusive man in their adult years. So, couple of my uncles are, you know, no longer with us. They died. They're not with us anymore. And that's not even as bad as it can get, right? And that's just one example, and it's not even as bad as it can get. So knowing how important it is for dads to be in their kids' lives, why do so many dads leave? And I think it's because they're weak. We have a generation of weak men. And like, take out the external factors, right? Like modern feminism, custody, social media, you know, etc. Take out the external factors. We have a lack of good, genuine men becoming fathers, and that turns into fatherless households, period. And yes, we have a country that has decimated the lives of everyday men. Like, society has squashed men as a whole. But it really doesn't seem like men responded the way that men are supposed to, traditionally speaking. And now we have things like a men's mental health crisis and fatherless households. No one stepped up and said, now that's enough, you know? And I believe it's a bigger problem than people even realize. And it deserves to be broken down even more than I'm personally capable of. There's probably hundreds of factors that go into why we have a lack of dads, but modern feminism and the court system seem to be the topics that come up in these conversations more often than any of the others, at least in my experience, right? From my lens. So again, these are just my opinions, so don't take my word for any of what I talked about. Do your own research, like I did, and formulate your own opinions. Just do your best to root those opinions in fact, not dogma. So, we'll get to my final thoughts now. I like to ramble. But I aim to grasp a better understanding of these issues, not just from my personal lens, but from the perspective of other regular guys, regular people, and especially from those who know better than me. Independent research is awesome, and everyone should do it, right? Should be encouraged. But not having anyone to help with the reflections of the topics you're researching can lead to inaccurate opinions and false truths. Now, me personally, I do spend most of my time like reading, researching, watching, listening to other podcasts, and, you know, studying people who are smarter than I'll ever probably hope to be. But it's meaningless if there's no feedback. It's useless if there's no dialogue among peers. or, even those that do know better. That being said, I am actively looking for guests to be on the Man Mode podcast, where we dive into the controversial subjects surrounding men's mental health. And we get the perspectives of the everyday guy. Right? That's what I am, an everyday guy. So that's what this perspective is on this kind of stuff. So, but what's the purpose of that? Right? What's the purpose of Man Mode podcast? To stop pretending that these issues don't exist and to start talking. Anyways, please send me a message in the Discord if you're interested in being a guest and can provide valuable insights into these deeper topics of conversations, or you just have like a really good story that people can relate to. I'm your host, Country Fried, aka Ryder. And I hope y'all stay happy and stay blessed.